Note how the inspector says it is the way I like to work, one person and one line of inquiry at a time, otherwise there's a muddle. Note how this is actually not how an inspector would act, but it does give us some insight into how Priestley will work the play, emphasising the structure that he will use, dealing with one character at a time. This response clearly rattles Mr. Burling, who answers in clipped short sentences. I see. Sensible, really. The stage directions give away his nervousness as he moves restlessly, then turns. You've had enough of that port, Eric. Here we can see that he is admonishing Eric and trying to be controlling because he is worried about the family name, again emphasising the importance of reputation in this play. The stage directions tell us that the inspector is watching Burling and now Burling notices him. This is important because it emphasises the inspector's omniscient presence throughout the play. The inspector then observes, I think you remember Eva Smith now, don't you, Mr. Burling? Again, emphasising the fact that he is all-knowing. Burling responds, yes, I do. She was one of my employees and then I discharged her. Here you can see the complete lack of remorse in his tone. Eric questions, is that why she committed suicide? When was this, father? Here you can see his childishness through this question, but also the fact that he is much more sympathetic to the working classes than his father. Burling responds with, just keep quiet, Eric, and don't get excited. This girl left us nearly 2 years ago. Let me see. It must have been the early autumn of 1910. Here we can see that he treats Eric like Eric is a failure. This is shown through the imperative, just keep quiet. We can also see the importance of social appearances as he attempts to avoid a scandal. It's also important because we can see that he is quick to absolve himself of any blame or guilt in this section. Burling responds when Gerald asks, wouldn't he rather that he was out of this and had left the room? I don't mind your being here, Gerald, and I'm sure you've no objection. Have you, Inspector? Perhaps I ought to explain first that this is Mr. Gerald Croft, the son of George Croft, you know, Crofts Limited, again attempting to threaten the inspector and use his connections to try and dissuade himself of any guilt. He attempts to intimidate using his status, trying to impress the inspector into letting him off the hook. The inspector, however, is unfazed, responding, Mr. Gerald Croft, eh? Yes, incidentally, we've been modestly celebrating his engagement to my daughter, Sheila. Again, you can see that Burling is throwing his weight around, attempting to persuade the inspector that he is innocent through the threat of status. I see, Mr. Croft is going to marry Miss Sheila Burling. And again you can see the fact that the inspector is unfazed by any threats made by Burling. However, this question, I see, Mr. Croft is going to marry Miss Sheila Burling, is a question that remains unanswered even at the end of the play. The inspector, according to the stage directions, then gravely responds, then I'd prefer you to stay. Again, this is proleptic irony used by Priestley, which creates an ominous tone, letting us know that Gerald is indeed involved in Eva's death somehow. Note the stage directions somewhat impatiently, and also Burling's ire through, look, there's nothing mysterious or scandalous about this business. Here the punctuation is important, as we can see through the pauses that Burling is incredibly annoyed. He becomes impatient and adamantly refuses to admit responsibility, emphasising the fact that he is stubborn. Note how he refers to those of lower classes as wretched. The adjective here emphasises again his capitalist nature and his selfishness, further revealing his annoyance at the inspector's presence. We can see here his utter refusal to accept any responsibility. Note, however, how he and the inspector are at odds, with the inspector saying, no sir, I can't agree with you there. Here we can see that the inspector acts as a voice for Priestley's own socialist views, whereas Burling is the complete opposite. Both characters are juxtaposed on stage to emphasise the divide between socialism and capitalism.